going to be a pretty different iPhone experience. Second of all, it's resolving on Monday, like in 2 days probably. WWDC is about to happen, so all that stuff about escrow, just make your bet, collect your winnings. Also, this is for real money. So I don't really understand the sweepstakes thing that Manifold has, but it says right there, prize market in yellow. So if you watch this talk and you make a bet and you are right, you will get paid dollars on Monday. Is that right? Someone from Manifold want to? Not quite. Okay. Okay, there's more detail than that. Eventually. You will get paid at some point in the future. So okay, so you do have to think about interest rates again and stuff like that. So this question is, will Apple announce an AI partnership with OpenAI that improves Siri at WWDC? Let's get started. So what's the first thing you do on Manifold? Is read the comments, of course. You look at the resolution criteria. Nobody really reads that stuff. You go to the comments, and you immediately find these two things. So like all good Manifold people, we read the comments, we find these two things. So the information reported, done deal. And Bloomberg reported, it's a done deal. So go bet, say yes, collect your winnings, that's it, right? But of course, as veteran Manifold bettors, you guys know, there's a reason it says 71 or 73% and not 99%. Actually, that's another good thing about this market, if you guys want to make some bets based on this information, is that given that it's at 71%, if you think it's no, there's a lot of profit to be made. Even if you think it's yes, there's actually quite a lot of profit to be made as this resolves to 0 or 1. So you might be thinking, okay, this looks like a done deal. It's reported in mainstream news. It's not reported as a rumor. They just said, this is done. This is going to happen. But since it's 73%, we might want to go a little bit deeper. Okay, so what do you do next? Since you're not done researching, of course, the next thing you do is go talk to Perplexity. You guys use Perplexity? Or is this a ChatGPT? Does anyone use Claude to research markets? Does anybody just raw dog it and just not check the AIs? Really? Still? I find that surprising. At FutureSearch, we actually like Perplexity a lot. We've been running a lot of evals, answering questions. It's not a very good forecaster. We'll get to that in a bit. But if you just have a factual question about what's going on, Perplexity, especially on the Pro plan, is like really, really good. I think better than ChatGPT. So we go and we ask Perplexity a bunch of questions about what's going on because it's an AI and it will do the research for you. Okay, so here are some questions that we asked Perplexity with the view that once we had a better view of this, we'd be able to make a better informed bet. Okay, so what has Tim Cook said about this? This seems like a good question. Tim Cook, according to Perplexity Pro, has said exciting AI features are coming up at WWDC 2024, and that there are discussions with OpenAI and Google. Okay. What is Apple going to launch at WWDC? So it's expected to be software. There's not rumors of hardware announcements. This is what Perplexity is telling us. And there's a section, this is a screenshot. This is a longer answer in Perplexity for you guys on the Pro tier. Actually, I think even the free tier has more information. But it says partnership with OpenAI. Okay, and there's some citations, and they will take you to some of the same articles you already found. Okay, so if we asked, what does Apple have planned for Siri? Perplexity says, major AI-powered upgrade, wants to make Siri more adaptable and conversational. Does anybody actually use Siri? According to the numbers we'll get to later on, a lot of people use Siri, but nobody I know uses Siri. Do you guys use Siri? Anyone? Over there? Is it good? No, okay, yeah. Yeah. So Apple is very nervous about this because AI is a thing now and they don't want iPhones to be dumb. That seems to be what the story that we're hearing here. And again, I don't know what's going on with Cohere, but more Perplexity telling us deals with Google or OpenAI. Okay, what does Sam Altman think about this? Ask Perplexity, it says, Altman has been involved in a significant deal with Apple to integrate OpenAI technology into Apple products, including Siri. Okay, seems like we're getting a pretty consistent story. Although, again, these are screenshots. Again, if you were to click on some of these links, one of the things you might notice is they're all just taking you back to the same source. Or if you click on the sources from those links, they are also just taking you back to the same sources that we already found. So, okay, how useful was asking Perplexity for information about this? Like this, I mean, it's very fast. It's once you pay or not pay, the marginal cost of a query is basically 0. So you can get lots of information, but it's kind of just parroting the first web results. It's faster than Googling, but it's effectively the same thing. Okay, so we asked the AIs, are we ready to make a bet? Obviously we are not, because we didn't run FutureSearch, because we have an end-to-end AI forecaster that some of you even have access to already, that can just reason through the entire problem from scratch while you wait. So obviously we should ask FutureSearch what it thinks and see. Okay. We're not doing it live because there's a lot of content in this presentation. So I'm just going to screenshot, and one of the, to be fair, one of the flaws with FutureSearch is it reports like quite a lot of information. So I just screenshotted out some of the stuff that I thought was interesting when we ran this question and kind of played around with it a little bit. Okay, so one thing FutureSearch does is try to figure out what is going on with the key players here. So here we identified Sam Altman, Tim Cook, but also these two guys, John Giannandrea, former Google head AI honcho, now head Apple AI honcho, and this guy, Craig, what's this guy's name? Do you guys know? Craig Federini. Yeah, so he runs all software at Apple, including Siri. Okay, so what do we have on these guys? There's a lot of text on here, but to just say some highlights, we found some of the same stuff Perplexity did. We found a little bit more about what Tim Cook said than that one Perplexity query. Something, significant investments in generative AI. Something about position to do this thing that's all vertically integrated because Apple is super vertically integrated, and that's all great. Sam Altman has said a lot of things about this, but one of the things he said is that there's some ethical considerations in partnerships, which I don't know what you guys think about Sam Altman. That's kind of an interesting data point, but he has said that, and that's one of the things that we found, so update accordingly. Okay, one interesting thing that FutureSearch found is that this guy, John Giannandrea, and his friend Craig have been playing around with ChatGPT and talking to the press about it. So there's this New York Times article from May 9 where they apparently were saying that it makes Siri look antiquated, which I guess the one person in this room that uses Siri could verify. It does seem pretty dumb compared to ChatGPT. So I guess these guys that are supposed to be making the best software in the world are probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So that's an interesting data point. Okay, and now for the first time we start seeing some hints that maybe this is kind of complicated, and maybe there's a reason that Manifold is saying 71 instead of 99%. So first of all, Apple is obsessive about privacy. What are the privacy implications of this? Think about it, we'll come back to this. Second is scale. Siri is dumb, but it is cheap and fast and mostly can run on the device. What's going on when you're talking to a ridiculously overpowered LLM that has Scarlett Johansson's voice and is answering your questions about how much battery you have left or whether you've gotten a text message today or whatever the heck Siri is supposed to do? Okay, so there's some things in the press that if you just do a much more exhaustive search that indicate, wait a minute, maybe this isn't so straightforward. Okay, now we get into the fun stuff. For those of you who have seen FutureSearch, we're just like totally into base rates. There were some things about like, is there anything, yeah, I think Dwarkesh said earlier, for those of you who saw that talk, is there anything other than base rates in forecasting? Of course there is, we'll get to that, but we do love base rates. We all love base rates. Okay, so here's something you might want to know. How often does Apple rely on external partners for technology? You guys have an intuition about this? One of the interesting things about FutureSearch is that we'll just have an LLM basically just guess what the answer to this question is, and we'll use that as a prior, and then we'll go find a whole bunch of data points, and then we'll check, and then we will update the prior into a posterior. We found this is better than just ignoring the prior, because sometimes the data points are misleading or you don't find that many of them, and LLMs are surprisingly good at just guessing like how often something like this happens. But to me, my intuition also was that Apple is more like just doing Apple's thing and not relying on external partners for technology. But empirically, they actually do this all the time. So that was an update for me. I think something like half of all of their product launches recently have involved at least one external technology partner. Okay, is that an update? Is that interesting? It's a little bit divorced from this like specific OpenAI, ChatGPT, Scarlett Johansson on your phone thing, but it's something. Yeah, please. Please with stay but also yes, go ahead.
Did you take a look at those examples of the like the things that it's using to figure its actual estimate? Are those like good examples? Do you agree with the ones that it did as like, oh, like we're not double counting, that kind of thing?
Right, that was going to be my exact comment. So you can definitely quibble with the extent to which this is actually useful as a base rate. Analogies are very hard, and in this case, I think a lot of the data points that it found, so that when it found that partnerships had happened, it was often for sort of low-level stuff like, the camera lens and the iPhone camera, or like, some obscure chip component or something like this. And a partnership, for a flagship feature like Siri is probably a pretty different
And I'm
animal.
like obviously wondering, so is it like different ones for the Series 8 and Series 7 and Series 6? Or is it like the same one and it counts it sometimes, doesn't count it, who knows?
We did sanity check these, but we have a lot of these, so we don't have time to go into these right now, unfortunately. There's a lot of base rates with a lot of data points. And again, part of the story here, the kind of the Straussian reading this, is that forecasting is ridiculously hard, and even one base rate to give you one aspect requires all of this research into all these outcomes to say, are these really in this reference class, and am I really getting this outcome correct? But hold on, because we got more of these coming. And yeah, I think, Lawrence, you wanted to say something about this one too. So the second one is, how often when there's a rumor of a partnership does it actually happen? Do you guys have an intuition for that? That's a pretty good base rate that you'd probably want to know on a question like this.
Yeah, so one thing to be careful of here is the availability heuristic. So, when you're thinking of base rate, it's like obviously easier to remember examples that have particular salient characteristics to them. So in this case, if there were rumors and then they later went on to be confirmed, this is probably going to be easier for both humans and our system to remember than cases where there were rumors and then nothing ended up happening. So you do have to use your own judgment when interpreting these probabilities. But our system does let you kind of click into the data points here and look at what actually happened. So I think one of the main useful things about this maybe is not the number that it gives you in some cases, but the fact that you can explore such a large number of sort of historical parallels and sort of get the texture of how these things tend to play out, and so it increases your understanding that way.
Yeah, I mean, as we get more into the inside view, a lot of this is like, well, how does the world work? Like, what is the causal structure here? And yeah, one of that is just count and estimate things. But another one is like, okay, just see lots of examples of similar dynamics playing out, and then think from the perspective of like, okay, if that's happening again now, how would I expect this one to play out? And there's so many aspects of this. Okay, next. When there is a partnership rumor, how often is it confirmed at a live event? Because remember, this market is saying this has to happen at WWDC. If this partnership happens, and they don't talk about it at WWDC, this is a no, right? It has to actually happen at WWDC. So, turns out, when you look at it, for example, the Microsoft OpenAI, like now infamous partnership, this was not announced at some sort of developer conference. Like, both these companies give these things all the time, but it was just announced in a blog post. That's how the Microsoft OpenAI thing was announced. And this is OpenAI, so maybe they would do something similar with Apple. Maybe Apple would insist. Maybe Apple would say, we don't want to talk about OpenAI like in a live event. We're just going to put it in a blog post. It's at least a possibility. Okay, getting more specific. When Apple partners with someone, how often do they announce it at WWDC? And again, this is not just any live event. This is their developer conference. This is about like all the cool stuff that's going to be in the next version of iOS or iPadOS or whatever they have. And generally speaking, even when they do these partnerships, and this one we actually pruned for the hardware partnerships. So these are software partnerships. How often do they announce it at WWDC? It's like not usually. That's not how they normally announce these things. Okay. We also have continuous base rates. So a lot of those were just like yes, no types of things, like does it tend to go this way? But one thing you might want to know is, if there's a rumor of a partnership, and that partnership does happen, how long is it between the rumor and the partnership? Because the rumor might be of some very complicated thing, and the partnerships involve negotiations and lots of money changing hands. One possible outcome here is that OpenAI and Apple are just absolutely fighting it out. Like maybe there's some sort of cost per query thing going on. Maybe there's like a traffic. Maybe there's a promotional thing. Maybe Sam Altman is demanding to be on the WWDC stage, and Tim Cook is like, no, you're not allowed to be on the stage. That's my stage. We don't know what they're debating, but it might be that a partnership like takes some time. And so we found all sorts of cases where there had been a partnership like this, where mainstream news had reported the rumor ahead of time. And you can see the distribution is kind of all over the place. Like sometimes it takes like over a year between something like that being rumored and it actually happening, even when it does happen. And the median is 6 months. Okay, what about this case? Like this rumor started coming out about 3 months ago, and the news saying this is definitely going to happen came out about 2 weeks ago. So what does this tell you about this? Like, was there enough time for this to get in place? Okay, so now we're getting into some very specific base rates. So we have really a lot of this question comes down to this guy at Bloomberg said this thing. is he telling the truth? Like, is that a real leak from a substantive source, and it is actually how it's going to happen? Okay, so how often are leaks like this true? When there's a rumor that a credible, like, not just like macrumors.com, but like Bloomberg, like Wall Street Journal, New York Times says this is happening, how often does it actually happen? This one was actually surprised me a little bit. The answer is like almost always. Again, I feel like I'm like the AI in this one. Like my guess is always like, I don't know, 50-50 with wide confidence intervals. But then you look at the data points. Again, there's a bit of an availability heuristic here. But these rumors, when they're reported in the mainstream press, like reputable news sites, generally happen. How about from Bloomberg specifically? This one I was really surprised that we actually had enough data for this, but actually Bloomberg reports rumors all the time. What is their track record when they say something is going to happen that it actually happens? And it's very similar to the other one. Like the base rate is not that different from the rest of the press. So Bloomberg is like maybe roughly typical with like their credibility for these leaks. Okay, and then my favorite one, which thank you to McKenna, our product analyst, for finding. How often does this specific journalist get it right when he makes a claim about a tech rumor? And apparently he's doing this a lot. Maybe you guys understand the dynamics of this better than I do. It's like he clearly has a source or sources within Apple. What's in it for the sources? Like, what is going on with this? Like, why are people feeding this journalist all of this stuff all of the time? But he's been doing it for like a decade. Interestingly, though, he's not any better at it than the base rate for just general leaks from Bloomberg or from the other press. Like, it seems like he gets it right a lot, but he gets it wrong a lot. So here is this guy. His name is Mark Gurman. And let's see. So yeah, this was the kind of Mac Silicon stuff, which was one of the biggest things Apple has done in recent history, is like do their own M1 chips and stuff. He leaked it before it happened, and it happened. That's a pretty good data point that like this guy like has the inside scoop. But there are examples where he's gotten it wrong, and those are interesting data points also. So we link a couple of them here. I think the thing that's most interesting about this, to your point, Marshall, of actually vetting all of these points, is that this is like a crazy amount of research to have to do. Like, if you're forecasting this and you're betting on this market and you're going to risk hundreds or thousands of dollars, you probably should go look into all of the rumors that this guy has reported, see what he was claiming would happen, see what actually happened, and start counting. But this is really where AI shines, because there's not a whole lot of judgment involved in this. It's like a pretty rote process. Yep, there's the availability heuristic. Yes, it makes mistakes. Yes, it will hallucinate and misattribute stuff. Like, it makes basically the same mistakes you would if you were just reading articles and like, did this happen? Did this not happen? But if you can do this for all of the things, you can get this like very powerful base rate type of forecast. But there's one critical thing in here, which is when you look through a lot of these data points and you look at what this guy, Mark Gurman, said, he generally said, rumors, or maybe, or working on it, or in progress or something. This time he said, it's done. Like, this deal is signed. Like, these guys did this. It's going to be reported on Monday. You know, everybody go make money on manifold markets. So that is different, but how different, right? Like, how different is this from the other ones? To some degree, you kind of just have to read all of these rumors from him and say, like, well, when he was this confident, then this thing happened. When he was that confident, this thing happened. Another detail here is that he is being told stuff by Apple insiders who probably shouldn't be talking to him. Those people could be lying. Those people could be wrong. Those people could be right, but then things change and Tim Cook changes his mind at the last minute, right? So just because he is faithfully reporting what he's heard and it seems definitive to him, doesn't mean it will actually work out that way.
Just quickly, some of our friends at Metaculus might remember the public figure track record project that we tried to do with Max Tegmark a couple of years ago. And yeah, turns out we just needed to wait a couple of years for LLMs to get better, and then it's just done straight away.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so to save some complexity here, there was like a lot of base rates. There's a lot of ins and outs of this question, but I think that last one of like, this guy called it, is he right? Like, that's the main base rate that I want to know. That probability is basically just a forecast. And that number was 77%, although it depends on your prior, and you have to prune the data points and stuff like that. Okay, so he said it's done, 77%. The market is 71%. That's a buy, right? No. You saw the last 3 times I did this. Okay, we didn't do the inside view. So this is what FutureSearch has been working on most lately. Some of you have seen everything we just shown. Some of you have seen before, this kind of like profile all of the actors, like do all of the base rates, synthesize it all together. But actually, great forecasters will do this very tricky insider view stuff that I find extremely hard to pin down. As much as I talk to them, I never really understand how to mechanize this. But one thing is really straightforward, which is like you just have to pick really hard questions and try to answer them well. So here are the questions that I would like answered to understand this. And again, this guy, Mark Gurman, is not causing this to happen. He's reporting on it. Like, there are people who are actually making the decision. It's like Tim Cook, Sam Altman, and then a bunch of their lieutenants are actually deciding whether to do this. And there are constraints. And so what is the actual mechanism by which this partnership is done? And like, what are the reasons that it might fall through? This is the inside forecast. Now, you might just completely ignore this because you might say, I have no visibility into this. Like Mark Gurman and his leaks fly on the wall thing, that's the best we're ever going to get. Who knows what Tim Cook is thinking? Who knows what Sam Altman is thinking? But I think that's wrong. I think there are some things that we can figure out from publicly available evidence, although it is really tricky to do. Okay, so first one. Apple is also, I'll get you later, Marshall. Apple is also going to do some sort of on-device thing. This is just my opinion on this. For those of you guys who follow this, Siri is going to do something that is computed on the iPhone and not go to ChatGPT servers, OpenAI, Microsoft servers somewhere. So one question is, how good is that thing going to be? Because if that thing is really good, maybe they don't need ChatGPT. Maybe they can make a Scarlett Johansson quality thing just on the device. Second thing. Okay, let's say they are going to route some of Siri queries to ChatGPT. How many queries is that? Like, is that going to work? Like, one of the things that FutureSearch found was that that's a lot of scale because those ChatGPT processing is probably 1,000 times more expensive than Siri just like doing whatever on-device computation it normally does. And then the third thing, what about privacy? Is your iPhone really just going to send all the things you tell to Siri to some cloud from some third-party provider who is just training their AIs based on everything you're saying? Is that really what Apple would do from a privacy story? What are they going to do about that? Okay. Now we're going to try to answer them. This is where it gets really confusing. Again, for the better forecasters in the room, I think if you took enough time, you'd be able to tease through this. This is what it's like to push an AI really, really hard to answer even these really complicated questions. This one's so complicated, actually, Lawrence, you should explain it.
Sure, yeah. First of all, for full transparency, this LaTeX was written by me. Our UI is in pretty rough state at the moment, at least for this component. But it's a relatively faithful representation of what our system produces on this question. Yeah, I don't think I'm giving too much away if I say that there are GPT-4 prompts involved here. So like the system does like a whole bunch of web research, like very, very extensive Googling and extracting relevant information. And then at some point there's a prompt where we ask the system to firmly estimate the quantity of interest on the basis of the data that we've extracted. And I was very surprised to see that GPT-4 was smart enough to realize how this question actually works. So it figured out that there are really two independent constraints here. You've got like a processing power constraint, like a CPU power constraint, and a memory constraint. So how this works is for a model of a certain size, you get a fixed number of tokens per second, also for like fixed CPU power. As you increase the number of parameters in the model, tokens per second kind of goes down. And also there's a memory constraint. Obviously, if you increase the number of parameters in the model, it takes up more memory. And so what happens is you keep increasing the model size, and eventually either you start generating less than 10 tokens per second, or you run out of RAM. So one of those two things happens first. And so the answer to this question is really like, it's the minimum of the maximum sort of number of parameters that can fit in memory, or the maximum number of parameters, the number of parameters that let you generate 10 tokens per second. So it figured that out. And then it was able to estimate both of those constraints. So yeah, just to run through it really quickly, iPhone 15 has 8 gigabytes of RAM. So yeah, that's like pretty much an initial starting point. With quantization, you can get away with 4 bits per parameter of a model. And then we found that there are some tricks that people do to increase memory efficiency further. So like you can stream in weights from flash memory, and this actually gives you like a factor of 2 in the amount of memory that you can have. That cashes out into a 40 billion parameter model. And then there's the processing power constraint, which turns out to be just much higher. The iPhone 15 has like a neural something or other engine that apparently delivers an absurd amount of compute, like 35 teraflops, it seems. And so it's really, the memory constraint that dominates here. And yeah, so we came up with a 40 billion parameter model as the largest one that you can run on iPhone 15. I'm sure that's wrong. There's like probably some bits versus bytes stuff going on. We haven't accounted for like the memory that the OS needs to run, things like that. But I think it's ballpark. It's like order 10B parameter models can be run on the iPhone 15.
Yeah, and yeah, that operating system thing, of course, is important. Like, you can't have Siri take your entire processing power of your iPhone whenever you ask it something. It can't just, everything freezes, everything else just runs out of memory. So if you said there was something like half or a quarter of that could be activated when you talk to Siri, that gives you the sense of like a 10 or 20 billion parameter model could be run on your iPhone. Okay, now, again, we're kind of beyond what AIs can handle. Like, is such a model good? We actually did try to use FutureSearch to try to figure this out. Like, what is the best model that is less than 10 billion parameters? But we were unable to get a good answer out of that. I think intuitively they're pretty good, but I'll just leave that as an open thing. Like, okay, so we figured out this quantitative thing, but there's still the interpretation. Like, okay, if that kind of model is what is powering Siri offline, how much do they still need Scarlett Johansson? Like, how much do they still need to send something to OpenAI? Okay. Number 2, the back end. Okay, so let's say we're just going to route all Siri traffic to OpenAI servers. What is that going to look like? Oh, actually, I missed a chance to take a dig at Perplexity Pro. Yeah, it totally messed up this question. This is a very hard question, as Lawrence explained. The problem with this is if you ask Perplexity Pro, it will still answer. It'll just be totally, totally wrong. And this is kind of a problem. Same thing happened here. If you ask Perplexity, like, how many daily voice queries does Siri get? It gives this 285 million number. I've also seen it give a bunch of other numbers. I've also seen it refuse to answer. It's just very variable. So is our system, to be fair. But one thing that was nice here, when we asked FutureSearch this question, this computation is much more straightforward and actually did it in 3 different ways. And all 3 ways agreed. And that gives me some confidence that the correct number here of the amount of voice queries to Siri every day is about 800 million, which again is like, my dad uses Siri. I don't know, nobody uses Siri, but there's 800 million queries a day, so I found that kind of a surprising update. Yeah, well, I'm not even going to go into it, but there's 3 different ways of estimating it. They're all very reasonable based on like the percentage of the market, the number of iPhone users, stuff like that. Yeah, okay, so this is kind of surprising, or at least it was surprising to me. And okay, now how many queries does ChatGPT get per day? Anyone even have a guess as to how many GPT-4 queries there are per day? I see blank stares, but I was just thinking about this earlier this week, and I had no idea either. So we tried to figure this out. Perplexity, again, just makes this so it makes 2 huge mistakes here. One, it uses the monthly number of ChatGPT users instead of daily. There's actually only something like 50 to 60 million daily users. And it says that people use 25 to 40 prompts per day, which I think is about 10x too high. So it comes up with this 4 to 7 billion queries, which is ridiculous. That's almost like the number of Google queries per day. So again, this one here, this is not the pure output from FutureSearch. This is a very hard problem, so we did some massaging it afterwards. But basically, the way to estimate this is to use the revenue number. So we know how much revenue, roughly, the ARR of OpenAI, and we can estimate how many users are on the different payment plans. Even just one of those, like how many enterprise users does ChatGPT have, was like a 3-day project for us to figure out how to use FutureSearch to answer. But I will say that even though it couldn't do it in one go, we could not have done this at all without FutureSearch. Like this type of like deep research and finding all these data points, reconciling all the fake stuff, things like people just claiming stuff that without any justification, to people claiming 2 different things, which one is right, things like data points from last year where you need to extrapolate a growth rate, people confusing team and enterprise. Like this is not public knowledge. This is really hard to estimate. But if you have that and you have the revenue, you can basically say there's a total revenue. Some of that is coming from subscriptions. When you remove that, the rest of it is coming from people just paying for API or per request. And if you estimate how much is paid per request, which I said something like 3 cents per ChatGPT query for GPT-4, you get this number of 200 million. Huge uncertainty on this one. But just looking at it compared to the 800 million Siri queries per day, you immediately see a problem. If every Siri request went to GPT, it would do something like double or triple or quadruple the amount of load on GPT-4. Now again, interpretation. Is that a thing? Do they have all that Microsoft Azure magic stuff? Can they just quadruple their load? Maybe, maybe not, but that does seem like it's a serious constraint. No matter how much Sam Altman wants to do this, I'm sure that OpenAI would love to absorb all Siri traffic, but it seems like it's probably infeasible. So what they could do is they could say some percentage of Siri traffic is going to go to GPT. So what percentage? Is it going to be like on a paid plan? Like how is this going to work exactly? But the straightforward thing of like, you open up Siri, it just sends a GPT-4 request, like the whole OpenAI service would probably go down. That's our best guess on that. Okay. Third question, and we're rounding out our ridiculous dive into this. So what is going on with privacy? So even if some percentage of Siri queries are going to ChatGPT, how are they going to tell their users that that's okay? That OpenAI is training on their data, it's being stored third party. We did this very quick check, which is like, does Apple ever just really prioritize some fancy feature over their privacy story? And the answer is basically never, since it's been like 5 years since Apple has been like privacy, 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 privacy as a differentiator. We couldn't find a single example of a partnership like this where they're like, well, it's just so important to get this flashy thing, we're just going to throw privacy under the bus and hope people don't notice. That to me seems exceedingly unlikely. So what are they going to do? And again, to be honest, FutureSearch kind of pooped out here. I think this is too qualitatively difficult for it to reason through, although we tried. I talked to some smart human beings because I couldn't figure this out either. We were debating this like crazy. It's like, how are they just going to send all the traffic to some other third party's data center? That's totally not what Apple would do. There's three things. One, they might just say, this is Siri by OpenAI. They just put a little OpenAI logo on it. It's like if it's dumb or they steal your data or it says that, some factual incorrect thing, that's their fault. We're Apple. We don't care. That's, OpenAI. Blame the partner. I don't find that particularly persuasive, but that seems to be the plan. Second is they could not turn it on by default. And this kind of lines up with they probably can't handle the load anyway. They could say, turn it on. And then if you're complaining that all of your stuff is being used to train the next model or something, or there's a data exfiltration or whatever, then Apple can say, that's your fault. You turn that on. By default, everything you do on an iPhone is secure. And then there is this third option, which I don't understand at all. And again, this is the insane fractal nature of forecasting and why I feel like I never get to the end of it. So Apple has been talking about having their own secure cloud with like a whole bunch of M2 chips, and then they're going to like run GPT-4 on it maybe? I don't understand, like, do they need to have the model weights? Like, is there a container of GPT-4 that OpenAI would actually give Apple to run on their own in their own data center? That sounds completely insane. But why has Apple been talking about this? Like, they've been saying this stuff about, and even the original FutureSearch forecast had this of, we have this cloud that is so secure, it's as secure as running things on your device. And to me, I'm like, no cloud is ever as secure as running things on your device, but Apple's going to try to tell this story. How is this just going to be their own hosted LLM that's much worse than GPT-4? Is OpenAI going to give them some GPT-4? Like, I don't understand this at all. If we have time in the Q&A, if any one of you understands this, I'd like to hear. Yeah, okay, someone understands this better than I do. So again, this is already beyond what FutureSearch can handle. This is beyond what I could handle even researching this with actual time to think about it. There are smart humans who I think could figure this out. But I think this gives you the sense of like, if you really vroom it, if you push an AI as far as possible, you say, spend any number of dollars, run any number of hundreds, thousands of things, look up everything, model, reconcile. You figure out a whole ton of stuff. It's enormously useful. And you still have more to figure out. But that's where it left us. So just summarizing everything. Yeah, okay, so I'll just go through this really quickly because this is going on for a while. So basically, there has to be, actually there's a whole other detail here, which is that this may not even be about Siri. This whole thing could be, that leak could be misreporting it. The leak could actually be about other AI functionality on an iPhone. I don't know how likely this is, but we think, okay, if there is an AI feature announcement, which seems virtually guaranteed because like Tim Cook basically said they're gonna do it. If it's about Siri, maybe 90%, if they're willing to send your Siri traffic to some server somewhere, 60%, although people on my team think that's much higher than that, they might send it to their own weird cloud, which I don't understand, so I'm giving that only 5% chance. It's probably with an external partner. The external partner doesn't have to be OpenAI. The leak is that it's OpenAI, but there's also rumors in the news that it could be Google, although there's antitrust stuff, or Anthropic, because our friends at Anthropic have a better privacy story than OpenAI. So there's at least some chance that they just do a big bait and switch. This whole leak about OpenAI, it turns out Apple was also talking to an Anthropic, and at the last moment they're like, nah, better privacy story, let's do Anthropic instead. Or both. This is another thing that our product analyst figured out that was not obvious to me. Apparently you can partner with two different people at the same time. There's some redundancy in there. So one option here is that Apple could say, it could be Anthropic and OpenAI. And then finally, they have to actually announce a WWDC. The timing is good, but remember that data point about these rumors generally take about 6 months to cash out in something. And most of the time when these partnerships happen, they don't get announced at live events or WWDC in particular. So you'd have to think like, nope, the timing is right. Like they have to do it now. Otherwise, they're going to miss the boat, something like that. Which, I don't know, 90% seems high to me. But I kept bidding this one down. My inside view forecast was below 50% for all these things happening, for all the raises, the doubt that I raised along the way. Again, we don't have complete consensus on the team here. Yeah, Lawrence, what was your inside forecast?
I don't remember, to be honest. It was higher than yours.
Okay, yeah, so I guess I'm pessimistic about this. Anyway, if you take that outside view and that inside view and you do the favorite forecasting trick of just average them, because I don't know how you're supposed to reconcile an outside view and an inside view. I never have understood that in forecasting. We get 60%. Okay, 60%. That's our bet. We could, I don't know, should we actually make a bet on Manifold? Yeah, okay, we should do that, right? That's a question for Tom. Okay, I see the probability fell slightly during our talk. Very slightly. I mean, it fluctuates. I mean, because again, there's a lot of volume. There's, I guess, 600 and, actually, no, I think it's, wait, let me try to do this. No, okay. Yeah, so there's like 658,000 mana on this, which, you know, you start with 1,000 mana, seems like a lot. And there's 1,300 people on this market. Yeah, it is falling slightly.
It spiked down and then it spiked back up again. Maybe when you said you didn't understand like any of the stuff.
Yeah, it's like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Forecasting is hard. Okay, so I'm just gonna. Okay, that was a lot because our track record has actually been pretty good lately. Pretty nice, right? Although for those of you who know Manifold well, the absolute numbers here are pretty small. We make little 5 mana bets all the time, so it's actually pretty hard for us to be profitable. But, you know, if we drop 500 because I was wrong on this one, I don't know. I think it was still a good bet. I don't know. Does it say in here?
I think we have like 5 resolved questions though, so it's not going to be very important.
Yeah, actually, just to show. So we started forecasting like back, so Manifest last year was September 20-something. We cobbled together our forecaster, it's still called Varuna back then, and we started making some bets. But it takes like a long time. It's actually really nice that Manifold gives you this expected value profit. So even long before things resolve, if things move in your direction, you get the kind of expected value profit. That's super, super nice. But we really started forecasting in earnest here. We picked a whole bunch of questions, started making bets, but then we wrote 50 questions and started making bets on those too. And then I have no idea why this turned into a straight line. Does anybody understand what that's about? But it looks good, so I'm not complaining. Okay, calibration. But yeah, I think most of the bets that we've made, this is not, wait. That doesn't look very good. What is this?
You have an A. You just don't have that A.
They separate the yes and no bits on the calibration, so the green one should be above the line and the red one's below. I see. Okay, great. Okay, good for us. But yeah, obviously more of these things need to resolve.
Yeah, as a binary classifier, we're an oracle. This is amazing. Oh no, wait, there are these ones up here. Okay.
Yeah, not quite. Okay. So going back here, is it going to go back here? I'll just drag this away. There we go. Okay, so I left this here. As much as we wanted to get like a really decisive forecast here, I mean, I don't know, we just made a large bet, so I think I'm satisfied with the amount of research that we did. There's still some human judgment. Like a lot of the threads of inquiry that we started actually just terminated in human judgment. Like, how good will the LLM on device have to be? Like, how serious is Apple's privacy story? Like, have they had enough time to hammer out the details? Like, maybe Tim Cook hates Sam Altman or vice versa or something like that. So I don't think this kind of AI forecast can ever get you all the way to this like deep modeling of the world. But I think you guys get the sense of what you can do when you have a tool like this and like why it would be valuable to do this line of research. And God help you trying to do this without an AI. I honestly don't understand how anybody forecasts. Like, how do you do this much work, researching all of those base rates, teasing out all of that stuff, modeling all of those parameters, just like in an Excel spreadsheet? I don't know how you do it, Tom, or anybody else. But just to leave you with why we're doing this in the first place. And yeah, maybe Lawrence, you want to...
Sure. Yeah. So, question is, are we doing a good thing? I hope the answer is yes, but it's an incredibly difficult question. It's an extremely complicated question, and I think the complexity of questions like this, like what is good, what are good actions to take. Like this is what got me into AI and epistemics in the first place, just understanding how complex those questions are. Unfortunately, the question applies even to pushing forward epistemics, right? So I mean, I really don't know what the answer is. But to make an argument that this is a good thing, or like what are the good aspects of it at least, one would be that it seems somewhat plausible that AI progress will continue to be fast, and the world will become more and more confusing. And maybe to the point where even just knowing what the basic facts on the ground actually are may become a problem. I think we're already sort of drifting towards that world now. I mean, if any of you have ever tried to do any sort of AI forecasting or thought about AI strategy or AI governance, you quickly realize like you need to know stuff about semiconductor export controls and Chinese GPUs and cybersecurity, air gaps, SCIFs, tons and tons of very, very complicated things. So to have a view on, what good actions are in the AI governance space already is a fiendishly sort of complicated pursuit. So if we can build something that basically makes that work easier, that seems pretty good. On the downside, I suppose something like this could empower bad actors. So I'm reminded of Ben's talk earlier today, and Anthropic's, evals for Claude. So like, say somebody wants to produce a bioweapon, do they sort of learn biology quicker if they use Google or if they use Claude? And yeah, I mean, a very, very powerful question answering system, plausibly somebody could use that to enable themselves to do something bad that they would have been unable to do otherwise. And so, to mitigate that sort of downside risk, I think we're very interested in evals like this. So, I mean, the Claude versus Google eval is very interesting, but probably what you really want to know isn't just, how well can somebody do when just like they have access to Claude the chatbot, but rather how well can somebody do when they have access to a very, very sort of high effort. Like if you throw the kitchen sink at the problem of building an information retrieval and question answering system based off of LLMs, like how good is it? So yeah, very interested in these sorts of sort of safety-oriented capability evals as well.
Yeah, just to be clear, we have not asked FutureSearch for plans to build a bioweapon. But I would be interested in doing that in a controlled setting and trying to see if it could do better than Claude would be able to do alone, or better than Google would be able to do alone. I think, yeah, as Ben Mann and his Anthropic talk described, there's this tricky problem of getting all of your subject matter experts who understand biological weapons together, putting them in a safe space, giving them Claude, trying to see if they could elicit tricky stuff out of it, trying to figure out if that stuff is useful, stuff you couldn't find on Google. But yeah, I think if you just really took a system like this that is willing to do thousands of queries and spend like dozens of dollars on one question, like would you be able to do something more dangerous? Like that's an eval that I think we should be running. And I think you could actually run it on FutureSearch like right now if you wanted to, but also, if we tuned it to being something that was like a little bit more consistent, I think it would be a better eval. And I just want to leave you guys with this kind of question here. Everybody talks about GPT-5 and Claude 4 and all of that stuff. I think we are all waiting for another model to come out that's better, that in 10 seconds for like 10 cents will give you a good answer to a question. But you also can just take the models we have today and just push them as far as you possibly can, give them every resource, every tool, have them write a model, criticize it, construct another model, criticize it, construct another model, search for the parameters, search for more parameters, like check everything exhaustively. We see that you can get much further with an approach like this than you might think that you could get with just Claude 3 or GPT-4 today. And so it gives the sense of it's not just like wait for the next LLM. It's like use the LLMs we have today. There's some really interesting stuff that you can do, and that is kind of the premise of what FutureSearch is about. Is like what is the best answer you can get to a question? What is the best possible forecast? Not the like fastest one, not the while you wait, not even necessarily the most transparent one, although we do work a lot on just trying to make everything legible and tracing through all of the arguments and stuff like that. But the best answer if you just had no constraints. Okay, that's it. If you're interested in trying it, go to our website. Thank you very much. I guess we'll take questions. Yeah, actually, yeah. So we're going to take questions for 10 minutes or less, and then we're going to go to dinner. So no office hours on the in the courtyard outside. Yeah, so what's the deal with the Apple Secure Enclave?
Is that what you actually want to hear about?
Can you do it really quickly? I am super curious.
Yeah, so the specifics of the Apple Secure Enclave aside, right? Like this pattern of having a device that you can like remotely determine definitively is in a particularly like configured state is like a solved problem, right? So there are these things called TPMs, trusted platform modules, and what they can do is they have like access to the system and they can read the firmware that the machine boots up into, and they can read like the various stages of the boot process, and they can hash these, and then you can basically request of the TPM like these signatures of the various stages of the boot process remotely, and you can say, hey, like, is this machine like in this particularly configured state? And if you know that and you trust that state, for example, like there is a small subset of software that like could be on that, like it's a very like tightly constrained bit of software that's on this, and you know like there isn't really any like you vetted the software that's on there for a lack of security vulnerabilities and yada yada yada, then like you can do things like say, okay, if this machine is in this trusted configuration, I know what software is going to be on it. I know that the software doesn't have vulnerabilities because I've looked at it and made that determination. Then I can say, all right, there is some disk that has like all of the model weights on it, and that disk is encrypted. And that encryption key is, for example, like stored in the TPM, and that TPM will only let the machine get that disk unlock key if the machine is in the configuration that you hope it to be. And so you can basically like center your trust on this like cryptographically like battle-tested, like verified, like industry-trusted piece of hardware that then like lets you do things like put something important like the model weights on like somebody else's like data center, and then you can go, right, like, I know definitively that this machine like is in a state that I trust. I don't care that that machine is Apple's machine or Azure's machine, right? I know how this machine is going to operate. And then, you can do something like have queries that are encrypted, in transit. The inference is run on that machine. The, result is encrypted, on a per user basis. And then that is sent back. And so it doesn't really matter where those model weights live as long as you can like definitively trust the configuration of the machines that are like accessing those.
Okay, that sounded really complicated. I understood like most of that, but I'm still skeptical that that story is going to fly for Apple users, that they're going to believe what you just told me. That if that's like the linchpin of the privacy guarantee that Apple is going to be providing users, I'm skeptical. But I'm wrong about a lot of these things. I think that's a wonderful example of just how complicated the world is and how like the whole world is like in a box. Like you look at that question, it probably wouldn't occur to you that you need to understand these TPMs. But unless I'm mistaken, that is actually a critical detail in understanding Apple's plans for the future and relevant for making money on this market.
Yeah.
And this is kind of why we find this so complicated and why we're building FutureSearch to try to understand this stuff, because it's nice to have you here to explain that, although I didn't completely understand what you said. But if we could have a tool that would explain that to any forecaster so they could reconcile that with all of their information, like the world's getting very complicated. That was already very complicated. Things are going to get even more complicated. So I'm going to take that as evidence that we need tools like this.
Sure. And in case anybody is also a security engineer in the room and knows that Apple doesn't use like a TPM standard TPM and they use their own thing that does the same thing, like I'm aware of this.
Yeah, but see that like it just keeps going. It just keeps going and going and going. It's so complicated.
My question was going to be.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think I might have missed something like very fundamental. The questions that you sort of through this talk asked FutureSearch to sort of reason about, were those questions that you identified yourself, or were those questions that were like identified by FutureSearch as the salient questions to ask for this analysis?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the system is very unstable right now, and it also takes like an hour to answer one question. Otherwise, we would have just done a live demo, and you would have seen it for yourself. The short answer is that we have a complete autonomous end-to-end forecast. That raises a bunch of other questions where you can go deeper. And then we selectively took some of those, and then some that we just invented because I was curious and it didn't think of that. And then we took it through this like hour-long question answering process, and then tweaked it, and then ran them again and again. It was basically just this really elaborate human AI, like co-piloted thing in order to produce this presentation. It is not the case that if you just ask that raw question to FutureSearch, you get this presentation out. There was like a whole bunch of human stuff that went in. But we're getting close to the point where at least the first pass will look something like this, and then off to the races, presumably.
Sweet.
But yeah, I just wanted to add, but also answering those questions usually generates like a lot of other sub-questions, and that's done by LLM, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it makes more sense if we were to show it, and this is not a demo, this is more of a presentation. But if you go back to one of these things here, where there's like all of these, or maybe the best one was this one, where we're trying to figure out what is the largest LLM that can run on an iPhone. Every one of these is basically its own sub-question. I mean, some of these are pretty simple, but like, how much does like loading stuff dynamically from Flash into RAM help? Like, what is the improvement there? There's some like Apple engineering article where they go through this, but this is its own question that FutureSearch then goes out and tries to answer just like Perplexity would, and then reconcile with everything else and then build it back up. So the output is really like a whole tree of questions. Yes?
So it seems like at some point you stop diving deep and just give a number. Have you done any analysis as to like what the return is on additional levels of depth and how your accuracy improves by like looking deeper?
No, we are really curious though, so we just need to run that experiment. I think that is an excellent question. You know, I see this, I can only say so many times, this like fractally, kaleidoscopic, like insane depth to everything. The simplest things in the world seem fiendishly complicated when you really want to get to the bottom of them. But what is the returns to actually getting those details right? What if you just stopped with the superficial thing? What if you just kind of like vibe what Apple's going to do with their privacy policy instead of going into all this stuff? Would your Breyer score be just as good? Would your profit on Manifold be just as good? We don't know. So that's an open area of inquiry for us. Intuitively, to me, you want to do this. There's some diminishing returns. We don't know where they are. And also, it's a bit of a customer question because we are a startup. And so to some degree, if the customer wants to know the answer, we will try to answer it. If the customer doesn't care, then we won't. But presumably like a well-reasoned thing where you at least in principle can go into whatever depth you want to understand something, like that seems like a good product.
Can I ask one question about cost? You mentioned dozens of dollars for those queries, but like how much was it for what you showed in the presentation?
Well, we'll leave you hanging. Thank you very much.